Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair.
Happy Friday to everyone.
Yes.
Mr. Thornton, we are streaming now.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What?
Morning.
Oh, that's a great picture I'm seeing here. Oh, everyone. Fantastic. Well, welcome. My name is Frank Thornton. This morning we are here and want to welcome you and thank you so much for participating. One of the first things we'd like to do is a Pledge of Allegiance. If you stand with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Parsons?
Yes, sir. We have a statement regarding virtual meetings that was included in your agenda packet. These statements have not changed for the last few meetings as we've gathered virtually. If there are any concerns or questions about the ability of anyone remote not being able to participate, or questions about how to better participate, staff would certainly be willing to entertain those questions. At this point, we don't have any that staff has identified.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parsons, and for all other persons who heard that message, please be advised. Okay, at this time we'll have a roll call certification of quorum. Madam Clerk?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Charles City County, Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
I'm here.
Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Good morning, I'm here.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Here.
New Kent County, Ms. Page. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Here.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Here.
Virginia House of Delegates, Delegate McQuinn.
Good morning, I'm present.
Good morning. Senate of Virginia, Senator McClellan.
Morning, here.
Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
VDRPT, Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
VDOT, Mr. Mann.
Here.
GRTC, Ms. Tim.
Here.
And RMTA, Ms. Dean.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We do have a quorum. And at this time, we'll go to A1, consideration of amendments of the action meeting agenda. Are there any changes, anyone would like to add? If not, I'd like a vote for just through acclamation. Could we get someone to offer? Chairman, entertain a motion on this.
Move adoption of the agenda.
Second, John Hodges.
Okay, motion has been made and proper second. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, if not, then we will accept that. And so we will have that approved in, nothing to be added to the agenda. Okay, we go down to A2, approval of February the 26th, 2021 Cvta action meeting minutes. For those of you, you probably do realize that they're on page 2 if you need to take a look at those. I think we
Move
just,
for approval, Mr. Chairman.
okay, can I get a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any opposed or abstentions? All in favor say aye.
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 Okay. Nays, none, so the minutes have been approved. Ladies, gentlemen, colleagues of the Cvta, here is a portion we go to now that we really want to work on and improve. This is called open public comment period. So, Mr. Parsons, do we have anyone for this?
We do not for today's meeting, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, then we go to A4, the chairman's report. I won't give you any report as such, but I would like to tell you about a birthday's date. On tomorrow, which will be the 27th of March, guess what? The Cvta will be 8 months, 8 months. And each of you as commissioners should be given a lot of credit. And if you get the chance to, look at the pages for your January also Cvta, and there's a listing of progress to date. So I think there's a lot to be proud of. And so I thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Parsons, Cvta activities report.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. We don't have a whole lot to update. The rest of the agenda is fairly full. I did want to say that staff will be producing an updated set of bylaws, and that will be forthcoming in the next few months to reflect the addition of the Port of Virginia to the membership of the authority following the last GA session. So the bylaws will be updated to reflect that starting July 1. And the other thing that we are working on is looking to feature meeting topics. And based on those meeting topics, staff will be recommending a schedule for upcoming meetings. At some point, it may make sense to think about frequency of meeting and the urgency of having monthly meetings. So we'll be taking a look at that in terms of the business that's ahead of us and coming back to the authority with a recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parsons. Any comments from any members about Mr. Parsons' report? If not, now we go to committee reports, B6. And here we have the Cvta Finance Committee update. Mayor Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning.
Morning.
It is a continued honor to work with the members of the Finance Committee on financial management and oversight of the authority's budget. As the committee and I continue to help move the authority forward, we have been busy with ensuring that localities, Grtc, Plan RVA are operating within the financial resources needed. We are continuously trying to ensure that processes are fair, that they're consistent as they are both developed and implemented over these last 8 months. The first 2 items on the committee report are regarding the regional transit funds dedicated to Grtc. Mr. Gregory will discuss the memorandum of agreement between Cvta and Grtc, and then Mr. Parsons will discuss the distribution of the 15% funds of the Grtc. Following that discussion, Ms. Heater will discuss the fiscal year 2022 Cvta administrative and operating budget and the future staffing needs of the Cvta. With that, I will ask Mr. Gregory to discuss with the committee the draft memorandum of agreement with Grtc services.
Thank you, Mayor Stoney. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, happy to present this. Before I get started on an overview of the draft memorandum of agreement with GRTC, I would like to express appreciation to GRTC and its staff. They were extremely cooperative in the development of this agreement. They participated in it. We had several meetings with them in its development. We also conferred with their legal counsel at the City of Richmond City Attorney's Office. And with all local legal counsel. They all had an opportunity to review this and provide input, and several of them did so. And that input has been incorporated into this draft agreement as well. In addition, we distributed it to the TAC for their review to give them an update on its status and development. And they had an opportunity to review it as well. I would like to think that your respective staff have reviewed it with you all. So if you have any questions throughout the discussion, please let me know. Happy to try to answer those questions as best we can. This is a draft, of course, so still subject to change. If you would like to see some areas amended or revised, please let us know. We'll be happy to make those revisions and bring them back to you. We do believe that this MOA accomplishes what is necessary to be accomplished under the statute. It provides for the reasonable checks and balances and roles and responsibilities of the two agencies, and accomplishes those things. So with that, the beginning of the agreement, just the recitals there, all the whereas clauses that you typically need in these kinds of things, setting forth the background and the statutory basis for the MOA. That's page 1 and then carries you through to page 2. Those are incorporated as part of the agreement, so they do have force and effect. Paragraph number 2 is where you get into the real meat of the agreement and the roles and responsibilities of the parties. That is the Cbta and the GRTC. Paragraph 2 on page 2 provides for the Cbta management of the fund, the overall funds, and sets forth how the Cbta receives the funds, and then will distribute the funds. Page 3 begins with the administrative and operating expenses, just to be clear of the parties' understanding that the administrative and operating expenses for the Cbta will be taken off the top of those funds received from the state comptroller. It requires GRTC to establish and maintain a separate account for all funds received from the Cbta, which is required by law. And paragraph 5 there addresses the main source of the Cbta funds distributed to, or the bulk of the funds distributed to GRTC from Cbta. That's the regular distribution of funds, the 15% funds as defined in the agreement and referenced in the statute. So the first distribution of those funds would begin the month following final approval and execution of the MOA. And then those funds would begin to flow in compliance with the terms of this agreement. Paragraph 6 addresses, so there's just to make it clear, there's essentially 2 ways that the GRTC can receive Cbta funds, right? There's the 15% funds, which are set forth, and that's the bulk of the monies that they're going to receive, probably or conceivably. Then there's other funds that could be distributed to GRTC for special projects, probably due from the 35% funds that the Cbta holds for regional projects. So conceivably, the Cbta could dedicate a portion of those funds for special projects or priorities to the GRTC. So there's 15% funds, and then there's whatever other funds that GRTC may receive from the Cbta revenues. And one distinction that you may think about is there was some question during the Finance Committee about, during the Finance Committee discussions about, well, how does the GRTC receive funds? Is it solely on a reimbursement basis, or is it to be distributed as received, like the localities are receiving their funds? And there's no restriction in the statute on the GRTC receipt of funds on a reimbursement basis. There's no requirement that it be reimbursement based. So so under this agreement, the 15% funds will begin to flow to GRTC just like the locality funds. Any other funds that the GRTC receives could be distributed that way, or it could be done on a reimbursement basis. That is, GRTC fronts the money for a project or a priority and then submits, essentially receipts and project documents and request reimbursement from Cbta funds. Either way of either of those processes or procedures could work, and this agreement allows for that. And it also allows for GRTC to request prepayment if a project warrants it. But all of that, of course, is subject to the approval of the Cbta. Okay, so now we'll get into how that works. Paragraph 7 directs GRTC on its use of the 15% funds in compliance with the statute, specifically section 33.2, 3701 D1, D2, and subsection F as well. And that provides for the Cbta approval of GRTC's use of the funds. Okay, on the next page, page 4 there at the top, this is another sort of check and balance on GRT's use of the funds. GRTC, under the statute, is required to submit regular reports. So we developed a method for GRTC to submit quarterly reports and the annual certification, which is specifically required by the statute. So quarterly reports of expenditures of funds will be submitted on a regular basis, November 15th, February 15th, May 15th, and August 15th of each year, beginning with the execution of this agreement. And then they'll have the annual certification by December 1st of each year, which is required under 33.2, 3701G. So that's where they'll sort of provide a summary of all their actions, the receipt of all their funds, all the projects they did, and that will need to be submitted, and then Cbta would respond with acknowledging GRT's appropriate use of the funds within 90 days of the receipt of that report, if all is well. Now, another sort of the remedy, if you will, if GRTC fails to provide the reports, the quarterly reports or the annual certification, there is a remedy. Cvta can withhold funds, further disbursements, until that requirement is satisfied. So there's remedies as well. And subsection E there in the middle of the page allows the Finance Committee to identify deficiencies. So it's not just you're in non-compliance, we're going to withhold funds. And there's an opportunity for the Finance Committee to express or ask questions or note that there are deficiencies in the documentation submitted in the quarterly expenditures or the annual certification. GRTC will have an opportunity to cure those deficiencies and discuss those things and resolve them, so that there is no disruption in the disbursement of funds. But there's a remedy process and there's a check and balance process to make sure all goes according to plan. Paragraph 9 addresses one of the statutory requirements, the Regional Public Transportation Plan, which is to guide the use of the 15% funds. And it's GRTC's responsibility to develop that plan on a regular basis. And all costs, the MOA provides in subsection C there, that all costs associated with development of the plan will be paid by GRTC from the 15% funds GRTC receives. So they have to manage those funds in a way to pay for that plan and whatever other projects they're going to do. And then paragraph 10 again applies another remedy for the failure to comply with the MOA. And that goes on to page 5. And then paragraph 11 provides that if there are funds that are misused, there's a remedy there it requires GRTC to reimburse the CVTA for any funds that may be misused. It also requires GRTC to maintain records, provides contact information, and the remainder of the agreement is just essentially boilerplate contract language addressing the fact that this is the entire agreement, no third-party beneficiaries. That would pretty much mean contractors or consultants. It provides for the interpretation and the construction of the agreement, severability, and an amendment process if that becomes necessary in the future. That essentially is all of the MOA. I'm happy to entertain questions and try to answer them if I can. If I can't, I'll try to get those answers to you as quickly as possible. Again, I want to thank GRTC. Julie and John were great to work with, and their staff, Adrian Torres, was wonderful to work with. The CVTA staff was also very helpful, as were the TAC and locality legal counsel, all of which had an opportunity to review this, and several of whom submitted very good feedback and helped to get it where it is. Also, not only the city attorney's office, but the GRTC legal counsel, which is housed within the city attorney's office, also provided input to this. So thank you very much, and I hope we're headed in the right direction.
Mr. Gregory, thank you for that thorough explanation. Any members, questions from any members?
Mr. Chairman, Canova Peterson here, please.
Yes, Ms. Peterson.
I would probably just need a little bit of clarification, maybe on the legislation or what have you. But my understanding is GRTC has basically is controlled by Chesterfield and Richmond, both of them, and has contractual relationships with Henrico County. So the operations right now are limited to those three jurisdictions. Under this legislation, I understand that both Chesterfield and the city have reduced their contributions to GRTC to 50% of their 2019 contributions, which is in accordance with the legislation, I believe, with the understanding that Cvta funds will make up the difference in those contributions, plus the additional funding that goes on top of that. When I look at that, though, that puts GRTC now into being funded by more than 50% by the Cvta, rather than just the three jurisdictions in which they operate. I don't know whether this MOA is the right place, but this is being funded by 9 jurisdictions for services being provided in 3. And I'm assuming that there will be some reaching out to the other jurisdictions with some accountability to put it bluntly, like what's in it for us, for the jurisdictions who are footing the bill now and having no services. Are services being planned? Is that in the agreement that how we're going to reach out to serve those communities that are paying the bills along with the city in Chesterfield and Henrico, and how we're going to provide some service to them? Is there anything here covering that, or is this something, or there are plans in the governance thing that the GRT is putting out to reach out to the other jurisdictions, or are we just all supporting services in the 3 jurisdictions? I guess that question, I don't know whether that goes to Chet, Eric, Julie, but I would like some clarification on that, please.
May I just say something in the beginning on that? I'm very sensitive to your statements, and I would really suggest that we would use as much sagacity as possible and looking at this. And you bring out a very important point, though, that some of the localities, each one has brought something to the table. And I think what I hear you saying now is that the particular ownership is just by some. What my suggestion would be for all of us is to remember that a couple of things. Number one, the taxpayers have really put in the most, but other than that, let's also look at the data. Let's start looking at some of the reports before we come to any conclusion on this. And here again, I really am sensitive to your point because you bring up the good point. This is why all of us are together. So when we came to the table, a lot of localities are not as served as well as some others. But I think in the grand design for the future, that's what we're all about. See, can we do things like that? That's just my suggestion as chair. Mr. Gregory, did you want to follow up anything on that?
I'd be happy to respond to the extent that I'm able, Mr. Chairman. I believe those are I consider those very good questions. The transit governance plan, which is underway now, it's in its development. We decided not to incorporate that into the MOA because it really doesn't have that. The development of that transit governance plan doesn't really have much to do at this point with GRTC. It's not a GRTC deliverable. It's something that could impact GRTC, but it's not part of that. But that is going to address, I believe, a lot of Mr. Peterson's questions. How GRTC is governed. Does it become a regional transportation authority or commission or entity, which the statute contemplates? Would it have governance by all of the all of the Cbta member jurisdictions? I don't know the answer to that, but that's what that transit governance plan and the recommendations coming out of that plan will provide, hopefully, or will address anyway. The funding that GRTC receives, the 15% funds that come from the Cbta revenues, that's just a matter of what the law dictates. So essentially, those revenues that come from the district, the whole planning district 15, part of that is going to GRTC. So in essence, some of the revenues derived from the other localities are directed to GRTC. But GRTC is also expected to develop a regional transportation plan under the statute. So a lot of that will be hopefully addressed in that plan. So there's accountability there. And I also believe that Julie Tim with GRTC has fielded some of these issues or some of these questions, and she's prepared to respond to them. So I would defer to Julie and welcome her input on this question.
Thank you. If I may be recognized, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Tim? Yes.
Thank you. I would be pleased to present a discussion of GRTC's revenues and budgets to this board to be able to explain what our plan is and how the expenditures are being looked at. The discussion about the use of the 15% funds for GRTC and for dedicated transit regionally, under the legislation, the first intent, I believe, has to do with the equity of transit and the regional nature of transit within the RVA region. The majority of that currently does exist in the more populated and dense areas because that is where transit, public mass transit, is most effective. However, as we look forward, we do want to look at how mobility considerations beyond public bus can be used to connect people throughout the region. And I hope that our transportation plan in the future will be able to reflect that connectivity throughout the entire region. As we look at our budget currently and where we stand with our plan currently, with the allowable reductions for maintenance of effort with our localities, there is a replacement of those funds necessary to keep current operations in place. The transportation plan that we will present in the next month or two, first and foremost, will ensure the continuity of existing transit in the region by using Cbta money to fill in that reduction as allowed under the legislation and keep transit and regional transit whole. There will also be an additional amount of money in the Cvta 15% funds that will allow for expansion of transit. The plan for that expansion is currently underway. It includes the representatives from all the municipalities, and it is going through a public involvement process where they are looking at how to use those funds, where they go, the frequency, the expansion of it, where they might allocate it in the future. And it will be looked at year over year. The current discussion that's happened through the collaboration with Plan RVA and with all of the local jurisdictions has focused on an increase of frequency on the regionally significant routes and an expansion for coverage for areas that have a high density of low-income populations to be able to better access jobs. And so that's the plan that has been drafted and is being advanced through the public process. It does not currently have an allocation that I would say is proportional to all the municipalities. That was brought forward as a discussion, and it was not prioritized. The priority was to look at the transit money for regionally significant transit routes and the connectivity that would support the entire region. And that's the plan that's being developed.
Thank you, Ms. Tim, for those remarks. Any other questions, comments from members?
Mr. Chairman, David Williams, Powhatan County.
Williams.
Good morning. I would like to thank Mr. Peterson for his comments. We share the same concerns, and we're going to be looking forward to getting more information as the information is made available as GRT's is put forward. But this is a concern for the smaller jurisdictions, and I would just like to again reinforce Mr. Peterson's comments because it is something we're going to have to address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairman, Patricia Page in New Camp.
Ms. Page.
Good morning to all. Mr. Chairman, I absolutely stand in agreement with the sentiments of Representative Peterson and Representative Williams. New Kent, as many know, we're not a part of the Greater Richmond Transit. However, we do have a transit system here. And so we would absolutely look forward to a seat at the table in this discussion of how New Kent County, and also, I don't know if Charles City is on the line, but how Charles City as well can connect with Greater Richmond Transit from our rural area. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, sir.
Ms. Page, anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, if you would, this is Neil Power from Guten. Echo my colleagues, and I'm excited as the sort of line of population from Henrico moves, and we see such growth right near our 288 and into Centerville. I think that's a really great opportunity quickly that we can see some expansion here into our great Guten County. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehauer. Anyone else? Okay. Well,
if I might, Mr. Chairman, this is Julie Tim.
Yeah, that's Tim.
I just want to, yes, thank you, sir. I wanted to express that excitement that there is so much interest in seeing regional transit and transportation connections through the region. And would really encourage and look forward to the opportunity to speak with all the partners in the region about how we can make that happen, knowing that there will be a challenge to prioritize our limited resources. But I am looking for the conversation and hope that we can have something productive here shortly. The goal for GRTC is to remain whole with our current funding and our current service as we work through this process. And that will be our top priority as we prioritize the additional funds that we could put out for expansion.
Thank you, Ms. Tim. Anyone else? Now, Mr. Peterson, thank you for that entry that you put on the table. Very important for the general welfare of Cbta. And I'm pretty sure that as we move toward the future, as we have always suggested, one family. And one family, we got to make sure that we work together collegially.
Mr. Chairman.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, now Mr. Parsons will discuss the distribution of the 15% funds for GRTC.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair. The next item, item B, is regarding the distribution of 15% funds to GRTC. As the local members know, there have been revenue distributions starting, I believe, in December to each member jurisdiction of the CBTA. Staff is ready to release similarly accumulated 15% funding to GRTC if there are no objections from the authority. As you may recall, in October, the authority took action to release $200,000 pursuant to GRTC's use to develop the FY22 Regional Public Transportation Plan, as Ms. Tim has just been discussing. Staff doesn't see a reason to hold the remaining funds and can initiate the transfer as soon as the MOA that was discussed by Mr. Gregory under item A is executed. Those are some of the items that are called out in the MOA, and once that has taken place, we don't see that there is anything, any reason not to release those funds. As you may recall, the funds are not allowed to be spent until the public transportation plan is completed and brought back to the authority for consent. But the distribution of funds to GRTC should not be held back for any other reason. Mr. Gregory, if you have anything additional to add regarding the MOA, I think this would be a pertinent time.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Mr. Chairman, happy to respond to that. In response to Mr. Parsons' comment, if you look at the MOA, if you wouldn't mind pulling that back up again, Chet, if you can, page 3, paragraph 5B. Thank you. States that beginning no later than the month following final approval and execution of this agreement by the parties, Cvta will distribute the GRTC to GRTC the 15% funds with interest at the rate earned by Cvta, if any. It's my understanding that the funds per the financial services agreement with Chesterfield County are the 15% funds are being held in a separate account that is interest bearing. So upon execution of this agreement, those funds with interest will be distributed to the GRTC. Conceivably, the authority could vote to distribute those funds prior to the execution of the MOA. That would be subject to a vote by the full authority as directed by the statute and the weighted voting criteria, of course. But the MOA as it stands now, those funds would be distributed within a month after the execution of the MOA.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Brown. That might be recognized.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, so again, I appreciate all the great work that's been done with the GRTC and the Cbta and Plan RVA staff. But I think that it's important to clarify, and I'd ask Mr. Gregory to speak to this, having some involvement in the drafting of the legislation from a policy perspective, and obviously Delegate McQuinn and Senator McClellan are on the phone, there was, other than the requirement of the plan, the transit plan being approved, there were no other conditions imposed by statute on the distribution of the GRTC funds. And so I think we need to be just mindful of that. And I think that the MOA appears to be moving in a very positive direction. But statutorily, I think there's a question as to whether the Cbta has the ability to impose additional conditions beyond that which was imposed by statute.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Carroll.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to have Mr. Gregory respond to my initial question before I appreciate Mr. Carroll's comment. I just want Mr. Gregory to respond to my initial question as to whether the statute contemplates any additional criteria or condition on the distribution of the funds other than that which is expressly stated in the statute.
My position is I agree with you.
Oh, okay, well, that's great.
I believe Mr. Brown and Mr. Carroll are correct. The statute sets forth whatever the process for distribution of funds, and it sets forth what the requirements for that are. It's fairly clear. The regional transportation plan needs to be completed. All the funds expended by GRTC are to be in compliance with the transportation plan and subject to the approval of the Cvta. Now, that's what the statute requires. The mechanics for that approval, that it could be just an after the fact approval, or if it's you could develop the reimbursement method. I think the 15% funds, if you're talking about that, is that they receive the funds. GRTC does the work in compliance with the plan. There's an accountability process under the statute and under the plan and under the MOA for them to report back what they did with the funds and what they're going to do with the funds, and then what they did with the funds. And then there's the other funds, the 35% funds, which are held by the Cvta. Those funds could conceivably be distributed to GRTC for regional projects. So you have to provide a process for that, for their receipt of those funds, and then the accountability for the use of those funds. So that's what I've discussed in the MOA. That could conceivably be more of a reimbursement process, right. But it doesn't necessarily need to be. It could be those funds are distributed at the request of GRTC as long as the project is approved, and then they're expended, and then there's a report back process. Right.
Yeah, again, thank you, Mr. Gregory. But just to really hone in on the fine point, which I'm speaking to the 15%. The 15%, I believe, was to be made available upon the approval of the transit plan. And I think that the statute is silent beyond that. And so as to this question, I think, which is what the chairman of the Finance Committee was raising, I think I just want to raise that there is no other condition imposed by statute other than that the transit plan be approved. The MOA, I believe, is a great tool, and it's consistent with what we're doing with the other jurisdictions. But I think we ought to be very careful about presuming that there should be other or could be other conditions imposed. So I think the statute does not necessarily permit that.
That I would agree, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Other questions? Okay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Carroll was a question for council.
Yeah.
So that being said, would it require a motion from the Cvta to release the funds, or can we just, based on what we've already approved for the other jurisdictions, release the funds, the 15% to GRTC?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carroll, I would recommend that a motion to that effect be made and approved by the authority, just so it's clear, so staff understand what the directive is, and we have a record of that.
Okay, well, and then I will ask Mr. Brown if he wants to do it first or second.
I will second your motion, Mr. Carroll.
And I will make the motion to release the funds.
Okay, there's been a motion to release the funds. Any questions from any of the members? Okay. Ms. Gregory, would this be proper if we had roll call voting?
Yes, please, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I would request a roll call vote, and then the calculation of the the weighted voting, of course, as is required. I would note if it's the will of the body, then we will amend the draft MOA to provide for this this distribution in that paragraph 5. So we'll take care of that.
Okay, before we go there, are there any other members who have any questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Neil Spoonhauer, Gutton County. Is this vote just for this the second distribution, or will we be voting for every distribution going forward?
This is just for this.
Just for this distribution, sir, just so the staff is clear to go ahead and do that, because there being some question about it, I would suggest there be a vote on it. Future distributions, I think, would occur as a matter of course.
As a matter of course, that's what I was asking. Okay, thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we have the clerk do roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The authority will now be voting on item B6B, the release of the 15% funds to GRTC. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Charles City County, Mr. Coda. I believe Mr. Coda is with us. I will circle back. Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhauer.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page. Aye. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
And circling back to Charles City County, Mr. Coda. Thank you. That concludes the roll call for item B6B.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Canova Peterson, Hanover County. Before we go on, I just wanted to express my appreciation to Ms. Tim for her discussions about taking transit regionally and working with this. And as Hanover County, we look very much forward to GRTC reaching out to us in engagement with these items. And I'm sure the other smaller jurisdictions will be looking forward to that same opportunity to engage with them.
Thank you very much. I look forward to it as well.
Mr. Peterson, David Williams, Powhatan County. Again, we agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments? Okay.
All right, Mr. Chairman, now Ms. Heater will discuss the CVTA administrative and operating expense budget for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Finance Committee at their meeting this past month reviewed the administrative and operating expense budget for the expenses projected to occur in the upcoming fiscal year. The document that was included in your packet and that's showing on the screen is a summary of that operating and expense budget projected for fiscal year 2022 compared to the current fiscal year operating administrative expense budget for this year. There are not a lot of changes to the recommended budget. The overall budget is recommended to remain the same at $500,000. We have included additional expenditures planned for the upcoming fiscal year due to operational activity starting. For instance, you'll see the first change between the two budget line items are in the audit. We are projecting expenses related to the fiscal year 2021 audit, and that is pending the RFP and negotiations that have been occurring with regard to the process facilitated by the Auditor of Public Accounts. In addition, we've included banking fees. The next three line items are relatively the same. We've upped the cost for insurance based on a prorated annual year of coverage as opposed to the prorated cost this year. And then moving down the lines, all of the line items for technology and administration are remaining as is, leaving the reserve for contingency in the upcoming fiscal year slightly reduced from last year at $143,500. A finance committee did review this. They made one recommended change to the proposed budget, and that was incorporating remaining $15,000 up in the professional services category for recruitment, anticipating that future discussions of the authority may lead down the road to hire staff for the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And so while those funds were not expended certainly in this fiscal year, the Finance Committee wanted to include that in the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So this is the budget that the Finance Committee approved in recommendation to you for publication and scheduling of a public hearing at your April authority meeting. The process would be that if so inclined, the authority would schedule the public hearing. We would advertise the proposed budget for the operating expense categories, and you would be able to receive public comment in April, and then would take action ideally in accordance with our financial management procedures so that your budget is in place for the fiscal year 2022 administrative and operating expenses prior to May 15th, which is the deadline that's been included in the financial management policies. Certainly happy to answer any questions or defer to members of the Finance Committee to talk through any of the specifics of their discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Ms. Heater for the presentation, but I would ask that before we take action on this item, that we allow the body to discuss the next item on the agenda, the future staffing needs, as the conversation and outcome could have an impact on the advertising of the FY22 budget. So if we could take up future staffing needs as well, Ms. Heater, that'd be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Finance Committee did request that Plan RVA staff prepare a proposal, a recommended staffing, a proposal for how Plan RVA could provide staffing support if an agreement for staff support services were to be continued for fiscal year 2022. So that will be included on the April Finance Committee agenda. Our high-level proposal would be that Plan RVA would be able to continue to provide administrative support services, meeting logistics and facilitation, behind the scenes coordination with both Chesterfield and the City of Richmond in their roles as in their fiscal agent agreements and other support as requested by the body. In order to do that, we do believe that we would need to increase our personnel assigned to this work. And our recommendation would be that we recruit staff member support to be able to help with the administrative functions that you now probably primarily see Ms. Mueller leading, but also to assist in supporting Mr. Parsons and myself in providing the staff support to you. So that proposal to the Finance Committee will be in greater detail, but we do believe that we can provide that staff support at the same dollar amount that was included in the budget for next fiscal year for the administrative expenses, $210,000. But we would be looking at the opportunity to adjust our assigned personnel through creation of and recruitment of an additional position on our staff who would be able to provide additional administrative support to the Cbta. I think in addition to that, if I may, the members of the Finance Committee, as my understanding, wanted to bring a broader discussion to the authority with regard to longer term staffing needs and executive leadership, so that as Mayor Stoney indicated, as we move forward with financial planning for the authority, we have a clearer sense of what you think your longer term staffing needs might be and how you'd like to fulfill those needs, certainly to make sure that the budget is consistent with that. Mayor Stoney, did I categorize, sort of open that discussion, I think, fairly for you?
Yes, I think we have to, I think the body as a whole has to consider, the long-term plan for Plan RVA, or do we want a dedicated staff person for the authority, things of that nature? These are all questions that the body will have to answer.
I think the last thing I'll simply say is that we have been in regular contact with both Monica Bachman from Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and Kevin Page from the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. Both are very willing and able, if desired, to speak to you about lessons learned through their processes. From the Plan RVA perspective, we would very happily continue to provide staff support. I think that depending on what you define your needs to be over the long haul, we need to determine how we would be able to go about that. But I think there are many options available to you in thinking about how to fulfill your needs once they're defined. So we're happy to continue to assist in any way that you think is most appropriate.
Any questions from Ms. Heater?
Ms. Heater, can that presentation be arranged for a future Finance Committee meeting?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to. They're just awaiting dates for when we would like to invite them. So if you'd like, we could schedule it for the upcoming Finance Committee meeting. Your preference.
I think that works.
Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate for the presentation be before the whole authority and not just the Finance Committee, if the mayor would be in agreement with that?
I can be in agreement with that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, this is Neil. Mrs. Bernard, can I speak, please? Thank you, Martha, for that. I would love to just echo sort of the sense of importance around this. I think, so wearing my hat as chair of Plan RVA, I'm get to see a lot of what goes on, and I think Ms. Heater has done an exceptional job and gone well above and beyond, as well as Mr. Parsons. I would also sort of ask my colleagues here to remind your county administrators that at this time Cvta does not have an executive director, and Ms. Heater does get called on in that capacity quite a bit, which puts her in sort of an awkward situation. So it would be a favor to me to remind your executive directors that of how this organization is set up, so to ensure that expectations are adequately set. Thank you.
Other comments from other members? I would like to suggest for the April the 30th, as we prepare for a public hearing, this would be, as a suggestion, a good opportunity for all members, particularly the elected officials, to kind of mention the new person on the block, the Cbta, and in your respective ways to let facets of the media know about the meeting that we will have, as we always try to get more public input. So I would suggest that we do our due diligence in that regard, because I think this will help us in what we're trying to do, so more people will know that we exist and what the Cbta stands for. And that might include some TV spots, might include going to certain radio stations. So it's a thing of choice if you choose to do that. So this would be at least a suggestion on my part. Okay, are there any other comments? Now, Mr. Parsons, on this one for the action requested, do we have to vote on that?
Yes, sir. I'd recommend a roll call vote on scheduling the public hearing.
Okay, the public hearing there. Okay, so any questions, anyone, as we get ready to have a roll call vote for the public hearing? Any other comments about that? Okay, hearing none, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get a motion for this item, please?
John Hodges.
Mr. Chair, we don't need a motion on a committee sponsored resolution, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Gregory?
Sorry. Yes, sir. That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. I'll go ahead and take the roll call for item B6C, the draft FY22 Cvta administrative and operating expense budget. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Charles City County, Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Vice Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Goochland County, Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Aye.
Delegate McQuinn.
Aye.
Senator McClellan.
Aye.
And CTB, Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for item B6C.
We go down to item B7.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you so very much. There's some good information in that report, and we're all much more engaged as a result of that information. Thank you. And now we go to B7, Cvta Technical Advisory Committee update. Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the last Cbta Technical Advisory Committee meeting was held on March 8th. Besides the 3 topics that are listed here, we also talked about the certification reporting process, which is a process that flows through the Technical Advisory Committee. It's a basic submission from localities with the spending plan of how they plan on spending the 50% allocation that goes to each locality. What we talked about is putting a process in place that will provide regular, perhaps quarterly updates to provide opportunities for ongoing eligibility criteria review, which will feed into the annual reporting requirement process that's being put in place for the Finance Committee. So we'll have ongoing discussions about that. We talked about having update to the local spending plans probably in the month of May as we get towards the end of the first fiscal year. And then at that point, work on submitting a plan for each locality for FY22 local spending. As far as the other 3 major topics that are being covered and handled through the Technical Advisory Committee and various subcommittees and working groups, regional the project prioritization process is ongoing. We have bi-weekly meetings on that. That effort through the subcommittee is headed by Chesterfield and co-chaired by Hanover County. We have mostly worked through the project eligibility process at this point. We're working on finalizing that to kind of define the universe of projects that will be eligible for regional Cbta funding, split amongst 4 primary categories of highway, bike, pedestrian, transit, and rail. I'll emphasize that the heavy focus of this group is looking at a system that will allow leveraging of Cbta money for other funding sources out there, whether it be smart scale, other federal funding sources, state funding, and other grant opportunities. While that's not exclusionary, that will be the focus for many of these projects, so that we anticipate very large cost to many of these projects, so we don't want to have to burden the Cbta to funding 100% of these regional projects. Much has been talked about already during this meeting of the public transportation plan. I will only add that based on earlier discussion, there was much discussion at staff level between the TAC and the subcommittee of inclusion of public transportation in some form for the rural jurisdictions. There is representation on this working group for the rurals. And while we may not be looking at fixed route local transit with buses running to the rural localities, there are a number of other public transportation forums that may be appropriate, many of which are already operating these rurals. So there's discussion about setting aside some funding for a future plan to sort of coordinate and look at how these can kind of be put under one umbrella through the transportation funding from the region to help subsidize and support those types of services. So that's a kind of ongoing conversation at staff level, and will certainly be brought back to the full group at a later date. Last item that's been covered under the Technical Advisory Committee and another subcommittee working on the Transit Service Governance Report. Thus far, stakeholder interviews have been conducted by the consultant team. Now they're moving towards peer review. There was a meeting scheduled for later today as they're still working on the peer review efforts in order to provide the draft report out to the subcommittee prior to that meeting. That meeting has been postponed, so we're looking at probably having the next Transit Governance Report subcommittee meeting in mid-April, April 9th likely. And the goal is to have that report finalized, bring the draft to the full body so that it can be submitted to the Secretary of Transportation, Governor's Office, and General Assembly by, I think July 1 is the deadline. So that's we're looking at a May, early June draft completion for that report. Otherwise, that's everything that's been going on at the TAP committee. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any members have any questions for Mr. Newell?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So sorry to interrupt, Mr. Hodges. Mr. Chair, this is Chad Parsons. I just wanted to provide a brief on-demand update. We are, as the interviews for the Transit Governance Report are still ongoing, we are certainly going to work with every jurisdiction, especially based on the overwhelming support we've heard this morning, to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk with the consultant about the transit governance study and that we have a good comprehensive view of positions across the region as that report is developed. So that's definitely going to happen and is still underway. So that will be provided as an update at the next meeting.
Other comments on Mr. Newell's report?
Mr. Chair, John Hodges, Town.
Hodges?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Mr. Ewer's excellent report, his comments about leveraging funds in the region, or at least giving that priority. The town would like to note that the General Assembly included legislation under its Transportation Initiative, House Bill 1800, up to $10 million for regional trails to support planning, development, and construction of multi-use trails, with priority given to developing new trails and to improve connectivity of existing trails and geographic diversity. It seems that all these criteria are met and even exceeded by the Fall Line Trail project, and would hope that the regional priority subcommittee would consider this, recognizing that there are some jurisdictions in the region that are not crossed by the Fall Line Trail, like Powhatan or New Kent, but hopefully having a regional plan with priority to those projects that are eligible or could take advantage of leveraging for state funds such as this. That was my comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Excellent comment. Any other comments from any other persons? Mr. Ewer's report. Okay, thank you, Mr. Ewer. Now we go to other business. This is the moment for each of you any comments from any of the Cbta members before we adjourn. Okay, very quiet on that day. Let me say this, if I may. Mr. Gregory, Ms. Mueller, Ms. Heater, Mr. Parsons, you know, there are persons who work for the Cbta that we never get to see. And please, on behalf of the Cbta, convey to them our appreciation for all the work that they do. We don't get a chance to see them. as we see each of you. But please convey to them that the CVTA members cherish what they do. That's very important. And we're not for the work, the fine work of persons who do the staff type of work there, we would not be what we are, and we would not be where we are today. So please convey that on my behalf.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, in my comments, I just wanted to say I want to thank all those who sent well wishes to celebrate my 40th birthday. And Mr. Chairman, I hear you have a 40th birthday coming up as well. As the month winds down, your 40th birthday will occur as well. So I wanted to, on behalf of the membership of the CVTA, wish you a happy birthday.
Mr. Mayor, let me say this to you. You're so kind. And how I would wish for the 40th one. But thank you anyway for being thoughtful. And I know someone shared it with you. And yeah, my big day will be on tomorrow. And
happy birthday.
And thank you. And the world change as for each of you, each member, the world changed when each of us came into this world. So thank you so very much. Any other members in the comments? Okay,
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of
Mr.
Chairman, on behalf of New Kent County, the entire county wishes you a very happy and blessed birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Members of the CVTA, I need a little bit of input from you before we adjourn. As we look at our April meeting, what is your intent? What would your choice be? And we're talking about now, should we go to in-person meetings, 100% or percentage-wise, or do we want to keep our virtual thing option? So I'm asking for some input from you for the next meeting, which is April the 30th. Of course, that's when we have the public hearing, having the public participate. So, any members, the chair would appreciate any type of input at this moment in time. What is your feeling on that? I don't want to make that decision on my own.
Mr. Chairman, Canova Peterson with Hanover County. I'm a big proponent. We need to get back to face as soon as possible.
Okay, in person.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Carroll, I agree. I think that as we move forward with our communities getting vaccinations and hopefully members of the CVTA getting their vaccinations and support staff, I think with the governor's change in restrictions, I think it would allow for us to meet in person and offer for those who are not available the virtual option for our next meeting.
Input from other members?
Mr. Chair, I am one of those, as a survivor, I guess, of COVID. I am still one of those individuals that would support that the virtual opportunities will be given to us. It is, the positivity rate, even though it's much, much lower now, it's still creeping up. And so I would hope we would give ourselves a little bit more time as we move forward, again, with the whole issue of public safety in mind. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos. I'm in violent agreement with the delegate and Mr. Carroll. I think, having an option for virtual is still critically important. I live with a healthcare provider, and I know that notwithstanding the vaccinations, the reality is actually we're seeing a rise in younger people with the virus and conditions. So I just don't think that we're back to normal yet. And what you don't want to do is rush it and then have a relapse. So again, I know several of the folks on this august body have had bouts with COVID, and I've been fortunate to avoid it, and I want to keep it that way. So,
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone
Mr.
else?
Chairman, I think that Mr. Brown might be talking about me, but you know, and I am of that young category that contracted the virus as well. And I would agree with Delegate McQuinn and Mr. Carroll that we should keep this as a hybrid as long as we can, just for the safety of our members. And so an in-person meeting, but with a hybrid, allowing for folks to be virtual as well, I think is very, very important as we're the light's at the end of the tunnel. We can see it, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. Any other members, comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Senator McClellan. I would agree. We still have a number of people who have not been vaccinated, including members of my household who, while I would not want to be carrying something that puts them at risk, I think we need to not only worry about who is in the room for an in-person meeting, but who we are interacting with when we come back home and into our communities. And I think until we get the positivity rate down a little bit more and more people are vaccinated, that at a minimum we need to do virtual. But I think one more month, at a minimum we need a hybrid. I think one more month of virtual is not going to be the end of the world.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, this is Neil Spudenhauer. If whatever the pleasure of the body is, let's just keep in mind the space at Plan RVA is limited, so we would have to ensure that we consider the location.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, I think that, this is Mr. Carroll, I think that we had, if we decide to do a hybrid, we had looked at 2 other locations other than Plan RVA to hold the meeting. One was where we held a previous meeting in Henrico, I believe, and the other would be at the new VDOT building in southern Chesterfield County. But again, we'll leave it up to how everybody feels. But I'm sure we could make it work if the body chose to want to come together or not.
Other comments by other members? Okay. All right, we'll take this under advisement and get back with you. Seeing that what I heard for the most part is we still want to kind of be safe, and we not quite there for the in-person meeting there. Is next one in Henrico? Is the next one training center? Okay. Okay. More. Okay.
You could do that at Chester or Chester. Chesterfield or.
Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your input, your attendance. Our meeting is adjourned.